What I'm interested in life is transformative and participatory. I want to be engaged in experiences, and that's how I want to view God. That's how I want to do life. That's the type of restaurant that I want to go to. It's just who that I am as a human being. I was 22 years old, and I still lived near the college that I went to, Harvard of the West, Azusa Pacific University. Feel free to thank you. Anyone alumni? Cougars? There we go. Best money you have ever spent. I was a biblical studies degree. Highly marketable in society. Highly marketable. And we lived there for a year after college was out, right across the street. And we lived in this apartment complex that AP was buying out at the time. And when they were buying it out, they wanted to do like a community engagement thing where they were going to like pay us to live there, right? Which was awesome. And then they paid us all this money to like throw barbecues for our neighbors who never came because we were kicking them out, right? So I just would have barbecues with my friends. And yeah, I know. You're like, I've heard these stories before. I have a missions plan. You get it, right? Okay. So we're at APU, and I was married at 21. I got married at 21 after my junior year of college. I see some of your eyes get really big. Yes. I know. I'm going on 19 years of marriage this year. Thank God it has worked out. Yeah. We joke about it all the time. We're very, very grateful for it. And we're like, no adults told us that was a bad idea is even wilder. And so we're still living there across the street, and now I'm 22, out of college for like 6 months. I still don't even have a frontal lobe, people, all right? And me and my buddies at night, because I worked at Red Robin, super lucrative job, when we were done, we were looking for things to do because even though I was married, I was still a child and wanted to goof off with my buddies at night. Like I had all the superpowers, like I was a day walker, you know what I'm saying? Like it was incredible. I'm married and with my buddies, incredible. And so we had this idea. What we would do is we would go onto campus, which is called trespassing, by the way, because I am no longer a student, no frontal lobe. And we would go onto the highest dorm room, and we had a water balloon launcher. And what we would do is we would wait for those people to come back from the clubs, right? So they'd be all dressed up, a little bit tipsy. We see them like waddling to their rooms. And we would water balloon launch them from a high top building. They would not see it coming. And we thought this was very, very funny. Okay? Yes. And we did this all of the time, just thinking like, this is our work in the world to do. We would like dial this thing in that when people would come out of the prayer chapel, we would, right? Like I'm 22 years old again. I have no frontal lobe here. I really want you to get into what's happening here. So one night we're doing this, and this is the one night I convinced my wife, let me say that again. My wife is a 22-year-old to come out with us, to go on top of a 5-story building and to launch balloons. And this is the night that campus safety must have been preparing for this moment. Like for weeks, they were having like SWAT meetings about this, right? We know they're coming back. It's a Friday night. The bandit water balloon launchers or whatever they're called, right, are out that night. And they surround the building, and we were like, uh-oh, this is not good, right? And it's campus safety. Like, this is not real police. You know, you get what I'm saying there. So we all disperse, and then when we disperse, at one point I realized I left a very important thing on the roof. My wife! My wife is still up there. So we had to go back, save wife, right, and get her down, because I don't want her, like, getting arrested because we're idiots. And so my buddy goes in the fire well. We didn't ever do the fire alarm because we were like, we have lines to draw. And then he got caught, and then while he was getting caught, we decided, by the way, if this is being recorded, none of this is real. This is a fictional story, APU, that never occurred. We decided to move all of the campus safety cars because they just left them there, and so we moved them to another parking lot while they were trying to find us. And this is my story about transformation and participation. It was one of those moments where, I realized I should grow up. Really, that's it. That's the moral of the story. I should grow up. Thank you. Thank you for clapping for that. That is that is an appropriate response. But for us, it was this wild experience in life until you finally realize, like, this way of life is no longer working for us. We need to change and evolve probably who we are and what we're doing here. But I really still want to participate in like that type of community experiences without being idiots. And so that was me working really, really hard to try to connect a story to a theological bit, and we're going to get there. So to talk about transformation and participation, we're going to talk about some things. We're going to talk about all of the traditions, not just a few of them. And if we're going to do that, then we're going to talk about everybody's favorite 7th century theologian, mystic, Maximus the Confessor, everybody. Yeah, thank you for that. After we talk about Maximus the Confessor, then we're going to talk about mother, father, wind, bear, potter, ... And if we can talk about that, then Pink Pony Club, my friends. And if we can talk about the Pink Pony Club, then we'll talk about Fourth Wing. And if we can talk about Fourth Wing, then we can talk about some contrasts. And if we can do that, then we're going to have some questions. So you have a piece of paper in front of you. And what I want you to do with your piece of paper is, on the other side of it now, right? Like fold it so you don't even see who was God. I get it. I get that you have a version of God somewhere back there, and even sometimes that version of God still sneaks up inside of you, right? And you hear something, and there's just hardwiring about how you understand Christianity and faith and whatever you're working through. But I really want you to not even see that part of it. And as I talk about some things today, and we're going to nerd out theologically, we're going to talk about a bunch of different stuff. I literally read theologians from every century, by the way, because I wanted to get a different perspective of just how did theology grow and evolve, particularly around John 3:16, which is the verse that we're going to talk about today. And what was the view of the church over time thinking about that verse? Because I'm really interested in this evolution of where were we at and who do we want to become? And if we're really going to think about who we're becoming and the ways that we want to live as followers of Jesus who practice this way in this world, then we really need to rethink about who God is. And we need to really name who God was, and that those things don't really work for us anymore. And maybe the practices back there don't work for us anymore. So if we're going to change who we're going to become, then we really need to make sure that we have a clear idea of who God's going to be. Does that feel right to you? Great. And so on this page, just write a note, write something that sticks out to you, write a question, and then at the very end, we're going to do something a little bit different. You can pop your hand up and say, we're going to do spitfire quick questions, right? But if you have a question, I need concise. We're not promoting the next show or whatever you're going to do, really, really quick thing here. And we're going to get to some of these questions. I love the laughter there, because that's what we do here. I'm okay with that. But on this one, we're just trying to move through this really quickly. Sound good? Okay. The verse that you all know, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. I don't think I've preached on this ever at New Abbey, interestingly enough. I don't think I've preached on this maybe since I was a young pastor. So we're going to get to it in each little part. For God. God means something different to you maybe today than it did before. And the great thing about that is that what God means to us today is probably a little bit different than what God meant to people in every single century. There are some constants in that, and there are things that evolve. The reason I say that to you is sometimes we grew up in a world of certitude where the idea of God was not supposed to evolve. It was supposed to be a constant that was unmovable and unshakable. But that's not even fair to your evolution or your development. And it's not true to human history and Christian tradition or Jewish tradition or really any faith tradition, because so much of God is also the way that you see the world and the culture that you live in. How do I know that? Because I had a lot of time this week to look through theologians of every frickin' century. And I've done this practice before in undergrad and in grad school, and you read all of the different theologians, and they have different views about who God is and what God's doing in the world. And sometimes we live in a world where we're just so certain this is how everybody should think about God, or everybody ought to think about God. And when people don't think about God in that way, we get angry. That's true in whatever previous version of you was there, and sometimes it's true in your current version as well. So who is God to you and who God is not is something that's incredibly important. I get all the things that God is probably not now. I get that you're not doing the angry God anymore and the tribulation God. And maybe you're not the rapture God. Maybe the health thing doesn't work out for you, right? Maybe anyone there that those are the versions of God that you wrote down. Maybe the God where this was the version of God that I had where I had to ask for forgiveness in very particular ways. I was really scared that if I missed saying all the things that I needed to be forgiven for, then God wouldn't wash those things clean. Did anybody live in that one? Was anybody else saved 58 times like I was? Thank you. I've been saved at camps. I was saved by Billy Graham. I was saved by Franklin Graham. I was saved by Francis Chan. I've been saved by a lot of people. And I feel grateful for that. You know what I'm saying? Beautiful moments. So you've got all of that. And it's all not bad, by the way. That's the world that we live in. Sometimes we're I can't do that anymore. I'm going to throw it all out. Don't throw it all out. Trust your experiences. There's some really good, beautiful stuff back there. and it's okay to evolve and grow. I used to do this one all the time at New Abbey. I remember sitting at a guy, and we were having beer, and it was like 10 years ago, and it was like one of my best friends. And he's just like, man, I really want to talk to you because I don't think I believe in hell anymore. And I say, okay, let's go talk about that thing. And he wanted to tell me that I was a heretic. And you maybe have heard me tell this story before, but I'm going to do it again. And when we get through with the conversation, I said, here's what I think. And this is like a metaphor that kind of came to me at that time. I was like, everything that you believe about life is this cup, and your faith and your tradition and God all somehow fit in there. And then what's going on in your life is like what's going on in a lot of other people's lives is they're like, yeah, but it doesn't fit in there. For some of you, it's just like really practical. You were told, this is Christianity, this is faith, this is God, but you're gay, and that will never be allowed in the cup. Anyone ever been there? Some of you just had like doubts and questions. You read a book that wasn't like Spurgeon or Rick Warren or something like that, right? And I'm not even mocking this. I'm just saying there's a certain cup that you were given, and they may fit within the cup. And I'm not calling the cup evil or bad. I'm just saying it fits in the cup. Right? And then what a lot of you decided was, what a lot of us went through for a long time, we're like, well, I guess it doesn't fit in the cup, so I guess I have nothing because I can't be in the cup. Was anybody there? And it just felt really confusing and daunting. And there was grief in that. Because, man, there's so much beauty in that cup. And as much as I joke about whatever, I'll always remember being at the Rose Bowl with Billy Graham and getting saved for the 47th time at that moment. But yet I needed it. And it was beautiful, and I was working through things. Right? And God was somehow faithful in that moment. And then you're like, but maybe the cup's not even for me. Maybe the cup's just bad. And then I think it's this. This is where evolving faith and transformation and participation just looks differently in our journey. Is you're like, oh, it's not that I'm taking the cup away. It's that the cup's there, but there's been a table here the entire time that's so much bigger than the cup. And the cup can still be there. But now there's other cups on the table. There's Greek Orthodoxism. There's Roman Catholicism. In each of those branches, there's like 1,000 different things. There's like Jewish rabbinic wisdom that's like 1,500 years older than any of our faith traditions that has many different thoughts and traditions. Oh my gosh, have you ever just read the Buddha? That sounds a lot like Jesus. You look at a bunch of different stuff, right? And then here's the beauty of evolving faith is sometimes you're like, man, the table, and you're so mad at people for still being in the cup. And then one day you're going to get to a place you're like, there's been a room here the entire time that the table's in? We know that there's aliens or whatever else the thing is, you know? And that's incredible that we're opening up to that. And so I get it. Yeah, that's not God. It's not interesting. Great, don't do it. Stop it. You don't have to bring it up anymore. You don't have to argue with family about it anymore. Like, literally stop it. It's going to be freeing for you. Like, find some freedom. You don't have to argue the cup with anyone anymore. Be grateful for it. You be generous about the cup and who God was. And then you live into a world where God is bigger now. That God is interesting to you in a different way. That God is freeing. Trust your intuition about who God is. That I tell my kids this, and it's so true of us, that Jesus just shows us the best of who God is and the best of what humanity is. And my children at night, right, since they've been like 5 years old, when I ask them this question, do they answer the question with Calvinism, Dad? No. Because that's weird, right? Who is God? Kind. Oh, yeah, I know that to be true, like in my gut. Even when they all told me that God wasn't kind, he was so kind to me. I even said he there, and you're like, doesn't work for me. She was so kind. They were so incredibly kind. The divine was kind, creator was kind. Man, the table can hold all of that. Use what works for you. That's okay. God, you know God in the Bible, all the different metaphors that are used for God? Father, sword, shepherd, light, mother, bear, not that kind. Potter, right? Is Potter a thing? No, odd. Do you think I said otter? Yeah, okay, no. I was like, my brain was working faster. It's like, yeah, no, not that one. And why does the Bible give us all these images of God? Because we all just need different things at different times. So many of you in this room, you're hurt by the patriarchy and father could never work for you. I've got deep-rooted mommy issues. And mother, I can't really come near that one. Truly. And we all just need different versions of who God is. So whatever God is for you there, trust yourself in that. Trust who you are. Trust that God is shaping you in that and that that is good. For God so loved. Loved is a different word here. Many of you grew up in church a lot, so you heard all the different versions of the Greek words for love. And yep, this is the agape word. It has nothing to do with like sexuality or intimacy in that way. It has nothing to do with romance in that way. This has to do with like a divine love, something that's like deeper, more intimate than anything that we can understand. Something that you all know. There are those relationships in your life, right? I have this kid that I coach for baseball, and he's been like struggling batting lately, and so like I'm trying to get like a little aggression in him. He's like this deep thinker, artistic, like sweet kid, but he loves baseball, but it's just not working for him at the moment. And so like 90% of my job as like a sports coach, which I love, is like therapy and just like encouraging and empowering small human beings to thrive, and it has nothing to do with sports, right? And so I'm talking to him one day when we're doing like tea work, and I'm asking him like okay, what gets you fired up and all this stuff. And he couldn't find it, and I finally said, who do you love more than anyone in the world? And he goes, my mom. And I said, imagine that a grizzly bear is coming after your mom. That's how I want you to swing at this ball. I swear to God, last night that kid got 2 hits, okay? Like, it's that kind of love that's so like innate and deep within you. For the parents in the room, you know that love. That's just like, it's overwhelming how much you could love another human being. You can't even comprehend how much you could love a human being, what you would sacrifice for another human being. That kind of deep love. That God who's like kind, good, your intuition is correct, and all of the evolution and everything the table offers you, that God loves you in that deep, intimate way that knows you like nobody else knows you, and can speak to that part of you that says, who do you love more than anything else? Who do you love more than anyone else? What do you want more than anything? Let me show me every aspect of who you are. That God loves you in that way. That God. For God so loved the world. By the way, this is where this passage already gets revolutionary, because if you're in the ancient world and you're Jewish and you see Jesus, right, and you think about like Israel and who Jesus was talking to, that he doesn't say, for God so loved Israel. This is where it's already way bigger than anything you could have ever imagined, that sometimes we're given a story of Jesus where God just loves the church. God just loves a very particular kind of church, right? Did anyone grow up? There was just like 3 kinds of people in church, right? There was like crazy charismatic liberals. There was evangelicals and Catholics, and only the evangelicals were going to heaven. That was my version. Anyone, right? And then some of you were in the other versions, but the other people were going to hell. That was fun too, right? You know those ones? Yeah, this is different. No, God so loved the world. Everybody. This wildly inclusive statement that there's this God out there that's already breaking the images that you have. In the ancient world, all of the other gods that were angry and they were just participating in the superpower structures of the day, and God looks a certain way, there was that God out there, and this God didn't love. This God judged. This God was holy. This God was perfect. Those are all Greek ideas and not Jewish or Jesus ideas, by the way, right? You'll never see perfect when it's talking about God in the Bible in that way. And anytime you do see the word perfect, doesn't mean perfect as we think about it. It means telos and trajectory. That you were given bad language about God that doesn't work for you, because that's not the story that the Bible's describing. This God is whole, and this God loves you, and this God is so holy, this God can see every piece of you, and this God just doesn't love you this way. Imagine that this God has the capacity to love the entire world. That when you can't see yourself, this God can see you. When you can't see your neighbor, this God can see your neighbor. When you can't imagine to see God in your enemy, this God sees them even there. How beautiful is that? For God so loved the world that he gave. Gave's a tough one here when we get to that he gave his one and only son, because for so many of us, you grow up in a version of this cup that what God gave here is that it's only rooted in sacrificial language for you. And so there is a God who sacrificed this thing so that God would be satisfied with you. There's all these traditions that are out there, and I remember being in undergrad and beginning to learn about all of these traditions. I thought that I was going to the Harvard of the West in biblical studies to like go to Bible school, all right? And really what I was doing this liberal arts education that I had no idea what I was getting into, but it blew my mind. And as we started to get into like church history and theology and biblical scholarship, I was like, why aren't we talking about this in the church? This is wildly interesting. Like we are like making this such a limited story, but this thing is so massive and interesting here. And one of the areas of our faith tradition that I began to fall in love with is Greek Orthodoxism. That in like the first 1,000 years of the church was just like one branch, right? It was Greek Orthodoxism and Roman Catholicism as we think about it today, but it was just one thing. And they were working through some stuff. One of the things that they were working through, there's a guy named Maximus the Confessor, who's one of my favorite mystics of the 7th century. I know he's yours as well, so I'm glad we're sharing that, is that he really debated and was eventually killed for this idea of incarnation. That the church didn't want that. That at the time what the church wanted was this idea that Jesus wasn't both human and God, that Jesus was just divine. And they killed him for that. This is what's crazy, by the way, right? So sometimes like we live in the world of like construction and deconstruction and reconstruction and why God, us, nobody understands. They understand. They were going through the same thing. They took their faith seriously just like you do, just like you chose to show up on a Sunday morning in the Elysian because you still care about this thing. I trust that in our faith tradition that people have faithfully been asking deeper questions about who God is so that they can have a God that works for them and makes sense to them so they can go live out and practice a way of faith that makes a difference and is meaningful in the world, that is transformative and participatory in a way that's beautiful. And Maximus, the confessor, was one of these guys who took this Greek Orthodox idea called theosis, and theosis just means union and oneness with God. And for the Greek Orthodox Church, that when Jesus is given, right, for God so loved the world that he gave, it means that God manifested Jesus in the world. Very different word there, right? Manifested this version of love, embodied something for you to look at and to touch and to feel so that you would have an example of what this life looks like. Very different idea in your head than God gave just a sacrificial lamb. But here's the beauty about our faith tradition is all of those things can work. Even the sacrificial. Some of us are so scared of substitutionary atonement. I don't love it. It doesn't make sense for me. I think it's bad theology in a lot of ways. But there is this covenantal sacrificial language that is in the scriptures that you have to reckon with. And we think about gave, not only that God gave his life for you, right? But God gave his life with you, and both can be true. Not in the versions of sin that many of us were given, that there's like a moral game that God is playing with you just to see if you can do it or not, or that God hates the sight of you, and that's why Jesus was given. More that sin is just the reality of what it is to be a human, that hurt people is all sin is, and that when you hurt, you tend to hurt people, and Jesus is dealing with, reclaiming, reconciling the reality that you have hurt within you. None of us would argue with that. And that Jesus needs to be manifested in body, given to you, so that you can deal with the hurt that you have. So that you can stop coping with your pain, because when you cope with your pain, you will inevitably hurt people or hurt yourself. And more that you can learn to care for yourself so that you can care for other people. That probably sounds like a little bit better psychology in the 21st century, right? It's all there, and it's been in the church for thousands of years. It's just if you're an evangelical, this was the cup that you were given. And there's a couple of cups over that have a different view for you. And the point of this is there's this big, beautiful, wide tradition out there that has space for you. So if you ever feel limited, if you ever feel like this thing doesn't work for me, maybe you're just reading the wrong book. Maybe you just need to chat GPT it just like a little bit harder, right? There's all kinds of incredible resources that we have out there that can get you in touch with some of these things. And maybe you're going to come across this language that's so beautiful. For me, I love the female mystics of the second millennia, right? I love their names, by the way. Teresa of Avila, Catherine of Siena, Julian of Norwich, Hildegard of Bingen. I love a German in here. This is my German accent, by the way. German is either like really angry or it's like the three little pigs, right? So it's Mechtilde of Magdeburg, like in her little Mini Cooper. Anyways, you get the point. No one else? That's not how you do German? Yeah. I think a little bit, right? Yeah, okay, thank you. All these mystics are incredible because they all talk about like union with God in this beautiful manifesting sort of way. And it's so fascinating to me. Of course it was the female mystics. Who this manifesting, embodying sort of thing. And I get it. I'm not like shitting on men. I'm just a man and I get how it works. Like I have read a bunch of other theologians. When I read some of these other theologians, particularly like in the mid-centuries, right, they're just like, God is a king and he is just and they will come before his throne and we shall have righteousness. And like there's a part of me as a man, I'm like, yeah, let's fuck some people up. NFL! You know, like I'm okay with that. I get that. That's in me too. I get that energy. And then there's another side of me like, oh, there's like this beautiful embodied side. And when you read these female mystics, it's like dragon porn. I'm not going to lie. Like no one else? No one been there? Not appropriate. Okay, great. It's rich. How about that word? It's very intimate. There's like a love and intimacy there that it's strong. I'll put it that way. But it's embodied. And there's something about it that, well, here's what's interesting to me, is in the Western church, we don't touch that. Because it's too, like, the puritanical side of us won't go near that, right? But there's like this embodiment. I guess that's the best word for it. That's so beautiful. The point is you can go in so many different directions here, and there's space for you to encounter the divine in a beautiful way. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. That this language is inviting you into life with Jesus, into incarnation, into one who shows for you the best of who God is and the best of what it means to be human. That phrase is also wildly political, just so you know. Anytime that we get Son of God language, it is an immediate juxtaposition to Caesar, because Caesar was called Son of God. We don't know that very well because a lot of us grew up in this cup of Western Christianity. But Caesar was called the Son of God, so anytime that phrase is used, or this idea that Jesus as God's Son is there, it's giving you a different version of authority in the world. That instead of it being Caesar, the Son of God, who had divine authority to conquer and to make you submit and to stay in line, although we find those, right? We find ourselves there a lot in our theology. It's another idea of, oh no, what if this Son of God is inviting you into a radically different reality and kingdom and way of being that is gentler and works for all, and it's an invitation for the world and not just your particular group. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish and have everlasting life. Believes is tough for us a lot of times. Believes means a lot of different things. If you're in the Protestant tradition, believes means this: assurance. Anyone resonate with that? That's what you heard. It is assurance. Again, our theology is a reflection of our culture. Protestantism, over the last 500 years, have also been the most powerful nations that the world has ever seen. And that Protestantism, it's really in the mind, that we moved away from anything that was embodied, and we built massive societies, the iPhone, stuff that's working for your life, right? Out of that type of thinking, but it was very cognitive. And there was a certitude that we needed to ascend to, and we left our bodies, and we left a lot of other things behind there. And so it's not all bad, but it's an assurance particularly about salvation. And I just want to touch this point. You're not really worried about what's going on in the world when you're the richest people in the world. So your view of kingdom and incarnation changes a little bit about here and now, because shit's already working out for you now, right? And so your view is just on eternal life, because it's like, well, if this is good, imagine it's going to get even better. Does that make sense? You can track this type of theological progression. There's Roman Catholicism, where this idea of belief is not just rooted in the cognitive assent, but it's really in your belief also in the church, right? And that's where Protestants were responding to that, and they didn't want anyone telling them what to do, right? And then you have Eastern Orthodoxy, which they believe that this belief is really rooted in transformation and participation. And it's really rooted in incarnation. And a lot of the Eastern Orthodox Church never went through the Protestant Reformation. It didn't go through a lot of the same political and social power dynamics. And so they stayed in incarnation for thousands of years, which is why I come back to it. And something for you. I know this is like boring history. Are we still tracking with this? Yeah, okay, great, perfect. I never know. All these different traditions are great. For whoever believes in him will not perish. Perish is also a tough word. How many, when you hear perish, you went straight to hell? Yes, right? Of course, that's rooted. It's hardwired in us. That's the cup that we were given. But perish here, you have to imagine, up until like the 7th century, hell, as we think of it, until like Augustine comes around, isn't hell. This is always a fun word. You know the words hell and homosexual are never found in the Bible? They're just interpretations that we use. We have words for them, and we give them to them, right? English words to them, but they're not in the Bible. Those are not words that are found there. In the Old Testament, it's Sheol, which is like a resting place. And in the New Testament, it's Gehenna, which is just a literal garbage dump found outside of Jerusalem that represents a place that you would never want to go, because that's where they would throw dead bodies of children when they would sacrifice them. That sounds horrible, yes. And God was warning them, that you don't want that to be you, do it, right? You don't want that to be you, do you? Yeah, you get it. Okay, great. But those ideas of what we think of like pitchforks and like layers of hell and like where everyone goes, it wasn't there. And so perish is more of this idea of qualitative life. Think about that even in sin again. If you're hurting and you're so blinded by your hurt and pain, have you been there? You've been in hell. Have you ever been there? Where it feels like hell? Feels like this suffering here. I don't know if I can ever escape this thing. I don't know if I can tolerate this torment in my life. That for incarnational theology of all of these mystics, it's no, this hell you can participate in reality. And what if you could participate in transformation in a way that you don't have to live in that hell? And what if resurrection is so real for you, not even just in the literal sense of what Jesus resurrected, but it's so real for you that you're so participating in this risen Christ, that even when the kingdoms and the structures of this world, that even when you're hurt and pain, that even when the suffering feels like too much, you still can live outside of that reality and have a different way of being. What if that could be a possibility for you? And what if that's the everlasting life? The early church, by the way, has always believed in full connection and union with God. So interestingly enough, hell is a later development, but ideas of heaven, even though we probably have very different ideas of like cherubs, Philadelphia cream cheese and clouds or whatever it may be, none of those ideas are in the Bible either. But this idea of union with God has always been there. And how beautiful is that what God wants is union and a collection and the reconciliation of all of creation. That's the most faithful to the text of resurrection, which for many of us in this cup, God hates this world, can't wait to get rid of it, and we are beam me up, Scotty, on an elevator. Anyone get that one? But the most beautiful idea of resurrection from Eastern Orthodoxy is no. God wants to reconcile all of this thing, that this beautiful world that God created, that God breathes into this life, this universe that is beyond our recognition and imagination, this very thing that gives us like consciousness and breath, God wants to restore and reclaim and make new, and understands that our hurt can impact the hurt of that, right? All of that, that's the thing that God wants to do in this world, and you're a part of that. So all of life, an integrated life, is what God is looking for all things. That resurrection would touch every last corner of the way of who we are as human beings, our societies, our world, and creation. That's what God is inviting you into. So, with that, I'm going to give you 2 minutes real quick, and then we're going to get into groups. Do you have any quick questions that popped up in what I said? Yes, go for it. Can we get a microphone real quick for people online?
Hello. All right. Wow, deep. Not really. I guess it's kind of a scary question for me to ask because I feel like maybe it's been asked before or not.
Just go for it.
I don't want to sound blasphemous, but whatever.
Yeah.
I guess what came up.
Not in this space.
Not in this space. I guess what came up for me is, first off, you did a good job. I guess, will God ever ask for forgiveness? Because when I think about, I guess, love and the union with God, and just this idea before of we need to ask forgiveness from God and from others. Mm-hmm. And when things go wrong, I don't fully believe in the idea that, oh, it's the devil's work, or it's some like dark entity. Sometimes it can be just God. And I don't know, or not dark, but tragic. So I guess the question I have is, are there examples in history, in writing, where God is asking for forgiveness from us? So I don't know, just a question.
Yeah, my fastest way to understand that is I think what Jesus does on the cross is that Jesus is showing us this ritual war court that we say in here all the time, right? Jesus didn't come to change God's mind about you. Jesus came to change our minds about God. And that in some way, I don't know if it's forgiveness, but Jesus is just giving us a fuller picture of who God is. I don't know if it's God. This is in my opinion and my understanding of theology that has created the suffering in the world. I think a lot of times it's our perspective of who God is, and that's what Jesus is doing, is helping us have a fuller, more integrated perspective. That may not work for you, that's okay, but that's a quick answer, and we can get later. Others, we're going to go quicker. Like as direct of questions as you possibly can, peoples. Yeah.
What makes a mystic a mystic?
That's a really great question. Mystics are really more interested in like experiential understandings of who God is. I think that mystical groups pop up in all kinds of groups, like charismatics, in part, like in Protestantism, are at times mystics, right? Mystics are much more okay with mystery. So anytime a group is moving away from mystery and they're looking for certitude, it's probably not a mystic. But I would say experiential and mystery is probably more mystical spaces of Christianity. That's a good one.
I guess mine's more of a curiosity, just wondering like what our future concepts of God will be like in terms of like AI. You know,
Yeah.
like how are we going to think about God in 100 years from now?
I ask myself that question all the time, and so much of what New Abbey is rooted in that idea. That I remember in starting New Abbey, I had this question of it, like, it's not that somehow God's keeping up with us. We're keeping up with God. God's not like surprised, you know? And so we know that we know nothing now. I think that's like the most beautiful thing about the 21st century thus far. 20th century, we're like, materialism, we have figured it out. Now we're like, nothing. Right? Like we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg, and I think we're going to have to ask a lot of questions when it comes to AI, potentially intelligent life of all kinds of different forms. What does that mean? Right? If I said that 25 years ago, people were like, you are cuckoo. Now I say, they're like, oh, I could see that. The drones in New Jersey. You know, like we're like, it's different. Yeah. I don't have an answer, but I'm like, yes, we should be thinking about that. When we're on Mars, like what's going on there?
Is it possible that, we're taking the literal translation from people who are 2,000, 3,000 years older than us? We're taking a translation of God more literally, the way that we used to think that the sun literally rose and set.
Yeah.
And that we need to kind of restructure how we look at something that probably was experienced 2,000, 3,000 years ago. Is it possible that there's new ways to look at God less literally or more realistically and less story-wise, I guess, is the best. I don't have the word for that.
Yeah, no, I think we all grasp what you're saying, and we say this phrase in here all the time, take it seriously, not literally, because literalism is so incredibly specific. You have to do so much work to take it literally. You don't even know what that means, right? You're just taking a very particular cup literally. I love like comedians on this, particularly like atheist comedians, when they joke about these things. They're like, your 7-year-old knows way more than Jesus ever knew. I'm like, you're true. That's exactly right. Right? They have iPhones. He didn't. So if we want to just go from like a knowledge standpoint versus like a wisdom and experiential standpoint, yes, of course we need to interpret things in new ways. Like all of this other stuff doesn't work for us in the same way. And that's a good thing. What I'm trying to free people for is that's always been happening. You were just told that that wasn't so. We got time. By doing exactly what you're doing here, by asking questions, by staying curious, by participating in experience in different ways, that when you move less from dogma and doctrine to more towards fruit and like health, I think that's how you do it, right? And I think that the best of any faith tradition moves towards that direction. Okay, great. You got 5 minutes to answer this question with one another in your groups. Who is God and who are you because of that? Enjoy.